Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cvent Source, where we share the latest data and trends on a quarterly basis. I know a lot of you have been here before, so thank you for coming back and joining us, and then welcome to all of you who are new to our program. Before we get started, let me walk you through some of the engagement features available on our webinar platform. I'm going to ask you right now to go in the chat area and let us know where you're tuning in from. Great, thank you. Use that chat area. Keep on engaging with each other, the other attendees on this webinar, and add your commentary or experiences based on the data that we're talking about, and let us know what you think. So we'll be able to also use our Q&A area. You can put any questions that you have for our speakers there, and we'll be able to provide written responses to your questions. And to download this slide deck and any relevant resources, you can click Resources on the right as well. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with the link to the recording that you can rewatch at any time. And with that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Kopek, and I'm a product marketer here on the Cvent team. And I work on the products that connect our planner, event organizers with suppliers. So things like our venue sourcing platform, the Cvent Supplier Network, our event diagramming tool, our room block management tool, and our Cvent travel tool as well. And I've been on the Cvent team for about 5 years and love talking about data and trends with our audience. And I'm going to bring on right now Alex Platia, who's also joining us today as a speaker.
Hi guys, Alex Platia, Director of Product Marketing for our Hospitality Cloud. I've been at Cvent since 2008, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the insights over the last quarter with you all today.
Awesome. So Alex and I are really excited that we also have a third speaker with us, and that's Jan, who's joining us from CoStar, and he's going to take us through some of the state of the market with the hotel industry. So we'll let Jan kick it off right now.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you, 15, 20 minutes or so with the state of the U.S. hotel industry, the way we see it. The August data just dropped, and so I want to weave that into the conversation about group demand and how we think about group demand for the remainder of the year. First off, quick disclaimer, as usual, none of my comments should be construed to be a comment about STR or CoStar. I'm purely talking about the hotel industry. This is our forecast as presented at the Hotel Data Conference here in Nashville. Stands at 2% for this year. Unfortunately, I think that's at risk because RevPAR year-to-date through August is at 1.2%. So we're going to end up the year at roughly 1.7, probably not going to just make the 2%. For next year, the 2.6%, if ADR growth is at the level of inflation, call that 2% or so, that is possible. But at the Alice conference in January, we may take that down just a tad. This is the breakout of the forecast by classes. What you're seeing very clearly is this term bifurcation that we've talked about that I will reference again, meaning that the upper end of the market is doing quite well and healthy RevPAR growth expected this year for upper upscale and upscale type properties, those that are offering large meeting spaces and are targeting the corporate transit demand. On the other hand, however, for the economy and mid-scale type properties where the lower end consumer specifically really has felt the pinch of higher inflation, those type of classes are not doing so well. We expect RevPAR deceleration, which is what we're seeing already. For next year, then because of the base effect, because the base this year is a little bit lower in some instances, we're expecting that the economy type sector is actually going to continue to show growth, is expected to show growth. And also you see upper upscale and upper mid-scale type properties continue to show healthy RevPAR growth. Just because as the American economy continues to expand, we expect that corporations continue to send their people on the road. Quick breakout here, top 25 versus all other markets. For a lot of the publicly traded companies and a lot of the REITs, the larger top 25 markets really play an outsized role. And so we like to break this out just to make the point that, yes, for larger markets, we expect higher RevPAR growth driven by group demand and corporate transient demand for this year and for next year. And now let's look at where we are right now. So through August, this is the bifurcated result that I talked about. So upper upscale, RevPAR up 2.3%, economy down 3.2%. So this 5 or almost 6 point swing is very unusual in a GDP growth environment. Normally, as the American economy grows, so does room demand across the board. We're not seeing that right now. We're seeing it on the upper end, but as I said, because of a variety of reasons, higher food costs, higher car insurance costs, higher credit card debt costs, interest rate costs, all of those take a bite out of the budget for the lower end traveler, and they then cannot spend as much time and energy and money with hotels and on experiences. So unfortunately, we're seeing that play out here right now. Let me talk about group and group demand specifically. To me, one of the most important charts we have is actually not a hotel chart. This is from our National Director for Office Analytics, Phil Mobley, and he shared with me that the office vacancy rate is expected to reach 25% for Class A buildings in the larger markets. Major markets here are not the top 25 markets. They use basically at the top 50 or so. But if you look at that red line, what this implies is we are not back in the office. The Amazon announcement notwithstanding, people are in the office a lot less than they were pre-pandemic. And what that then means is that tenants and CEOs of companies that use office space are saying, well, I don't need as much office space. And the implication of that then is that, of course, we are seeing fewer corporate transient travelers because I'm not going to hop on a plane and meet with you in your kitchen, right? We're just going to do this on Teams or on Zoom. So this higher vacancy rate has, on the one hand, a negative implication for corporate transient demand. But on the other hand, I think this drives a tailwind for group demand. Because if we are not in the office all the time, we still have to get together. We still have to build culture. CEO still wants to get us together and talk about strategy. So what that means then is we're seeing more groups that did not happen pre-2020. So let's talk about that a little bit. This is the demand, transient versus group. So as most of you know, on the upper end, so this is just for luxury and upper upscale hotels, we're asking, is the room that you're selling sold in increments of 10 or more, what's called group, or increments between 1 and 9, what's called transient. And what you're seeing here is on the transient side, yes, we're basically back to where we were. But keep in mind, this includes leisure and this includes weekend, right? Transient is just, we're asking how many rooms are booked together. And it's just one room. It could be a leisure room, and that obviously drives that number. On the group side, well, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. You see that we're selling more group rooms now than we did last year. We're not quite at 2019 results, but I think we are getting there slowly but surely. Pricing implications are very interesting. So on the transient side, we have seen only 5 markets year to date that are driving transient ADR over, and I'm using 2% here as a level of inflation, over CPI growth. That implies that as your costs go up as an operator and you're not driving your top line, that means your margins are going to get squeezed likely. What's super interesting to see is on the group side, we're seeing arguably tremendous pricing power. Now, Las Vegas, clearly an outlier. They had the Super Bowl, 13% group ADR changes is not sustainable, and nobody expects that to happen next year. But it was just interesting to see how much power the Las Vegas market exerted on pricing. Phoenix, on the other hand, of course, is the reverse because they had the Super Bowl a year ago. And so this is the inverse comp. But you're seeing here very nicely for markets like Houston, Dallas, Detroit, Tampa, Boston, that there is some pricing power for group rooms. Now, for some markets, they're coming off a very low base, but still nonetheless, good to see that as there's demand, there is some pricing power. The next 2 charts, there's a lot going on here. What I'm trying to accomplish is to share how many markets have sold more group rooms than 2023, which means they're above the horizontal line, but also how many of them have sold more group rooms than 2019, which is there on the right-hand side of the vertical line. And you see there are only 5 markets: Vegas, Tampa, Orlando, Dallas, and Nashville. So the Smile states, or the southern states. Las Vegas, of course, an outlier because of the Super Bowl. But point here is that the markets that have multiple legs to stand on and allow the meeting plan to say, oh, we want to go to this market because we can be partially outside. They have a lot of entertainment options outside of the hotel. Those markets have done well. On the other side, LA, San Diego, New Orleans, St. Louis have sold fewer rooms than 19, not a surprise, but fewer rooms than last year. And then you see a bunch of the other markets here, New York, Seattle, Oahu, having well outperformed last year. And then I'm having this gray box here on the next slide. This is just that gray box I just showed you. So these are markets that have not sold more group rooms than 2019, but have sold more than 2023. And point here is to say, look, for Houston, for Denver, for Phoenix, they're slowly but surely getting to selling more rooms than in 2019. And of course, all of those outperformed the year before. Why we continue to be bullish on group demand? Our friends from Deloitte in their corporate business travel survey asked 100 high-end corporate corporate travel managers, and those are people who are in charge of hundreds and billions of dollars of spend for hotel, air, and car. And they asked them, are you increasing your spending? And if so, why? And you see the 2 green bars that are above the black bars, where 24 spend is higher than 23, is for training, learning, and development and team meetings. Exactly the point that we cannot do in the office if we're not all in the office together. So I think this sort of feeds very well into smaller meetings. And when I talk to some operators and some management companies in my travels, and I ask, how are those meetings doing? People are saying, yeah, we see them, but what we don't like about them is that their booking window is so short. It's not even in the quarter for the quarter. It's like in the month for the month. Very, very hard to budget and to plan for, but they kind of show up, And so these are the internal meetings that we can't do because we're not all in the office together. The other piece that they talk about here is they're asking travel frequency. Half the respondents said, yes, we're going to travel more. Why are you traveling more? Higher participation at events. I think that, again, feeds directly into group demand. I thought also super interesting, higher team desire to travel here, the third one down on the list, because I think we're all teamed out and zoomed out, right? People want to be together after 4 years of sitting online. Just a little data point here that I thought I'd share. I thought this was interesting. I didn't expect this before I wrote this article for Hotel News Now. But what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the top 25 transient room rate versus all other markets' transient room rates. And you can see that traditionally, there was a $20 premium or so of transient rates in the larger markets versus the smaller markets. That premium has completely collapsed down to $3. On the group side, however, which is probably more important to you right now, is that premium has continued. Outside of 2021, if you're in the top 25 markets, you have much more pricing power for groups compared to all other markets. That was the KPI part of the presentation, occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR. Let me briefly flip over to the pipeline, because I know that is on some people's minds with the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates. Will we see more activity? And the answer is likely not, or not soon anyways. For the last 32 months, the number of rooms in construction has been between 150 and 160,000. We don't expect that to change. You see that the number of rooms in construction is up, call it 8% or so. Really nothing to write home about. Where we see a bubble is in the planning phase. So where the developer says, look, I think I have the land, I'm talking to the brand, and now I'm going to the bank, and the bank says, oh, your interest rate for construction is what, 15, 16% or so. And that's when developers are saying, well, then let me hold off and wait for a minute, but I have all the plans ready. And that's what we call the planning phase. And you see that that's up 40%. Will all those rooms happen? Yeah, probably. Will they all happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. I think this is new supply that we're talking about in 2026, arguably. And then when you drill down into what we're building, and if you've seen one of my presentations before, this chart used to be called, we're not building ballrooms anymore. You see that the upper upscale change is only 15,000 rooms or so of rooms in construction. So very limited new supply for hotels that target the group traveler, and a lot more limited service hotels, upscale, upper mid-scale, and mid-scale type properties. Before I finish, quick plug. If you are interested in the monthly and weekly performance data, it is now available in the CoStar product for 600 markets and over 2,000 sub-markets globally, all at the click of a button. And you don't have to call Hendersonville, Tennessee anymore to ask for a market report. We now have this all on the CoStar platform. And lastly, as usual, if you're interested in this, my colleague Isaac Colazo on the right-hand side and myself have a podcast now called Tell Me More, the Hospitality Data Podcast. Comes out once a month when the monthly data drops, and he and I riff, clearly unscripted, about the state of the industry and give you hopefully some context to what the STR CoStar data shows. With that said, I appreciate your time, and I want to hand it back to Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Alex and I are going to share the latest findings based on how customers are using our event and hospitality platform. But first, let's explain how we get the data we're about to share. And it's all based on the powerful network effect that our technology creates. And this is what we like to call the Cvent ecosystem. So I'm going to start on the left side, our event cloud. And internally, this is what we call our event technology that empowers planners and marketers to create amazing events across in-person, hybrid, and virtual formats. We have 126,000 active planner users, and they source over 3 million total grouped RFPs last year.
And with over 309,000 venues on the Cvent supplier network, these hotels and destinations use our Hospitality Cloud platform to reach these organizers, showcase their unique event space, and collaborate and plan meetings and events of all types and sizes. Since the inception in 2008, over $140 billion has been sourced through the CSN. And because we power this events ecosystem, we have a ton of interesting data that we'll share with you today. You can refer to and use these benchmarks and trends to measure and improve your event programs, no matter where you sit in the ecosystem. So now that we've set the context, let's take a look at some of the recent insights we're seeing across the Cvent supplier network. Through the second quarter of the year, in-person events continue to grow. RFP volume is up 12%, room nights are up 21%, and the proposed rate growth is only up 0.5%. This slow growth in ADR means that the average rate at which hotel rooms are sold has remained stable over the last year. And while this might be good for planners in the room, it could mean lower revenue for hotels, as they may not be able to command those higher prices for their rooms. But putting things in perspective, over the last several years, we've seen a significant increase in ADR. And if we look back just 1 year, ADR was up 5%. Now, throughout today's webinar, we've got a lot of new stats that we're going to share. And here's a new cut that we're sharing for the first time today. As you know, within Cvent, there's a wide range of the types of meetings and events sourced. Planners and marketers use the CSN to source anything from their annual conference down to a field marketing event. In fact, in Q2 of 2024, 36% of the events sourced through Cvent were considered to be small RFPs. And on average, these events had about 30 attendees and 15 peak rooms. Next up, we've also noticed a trend with planners and marketers looking to source unique venues for their events. Over the last year, we've seen a 20% increase in RFP value sourced to these unique venues. And one more exciting stat in my mind has to do with CVBs. In Q2 of 2024, CVBs were copied on 38% of the RFPs. And that 38% of the RFPs represents 70% of the value sourced through Cvent. So planners continue to prefer copying CVBs on the larger RFPs. Now, with that being said, any of the planners in attendance today, type in the chat a few of the reasons you love working with a CVB. And for any CVBs attending, tell us about the types of events you prefer to work with planners on. Is it really just for those large meetings, or are you looking to get more involved in the smaller and mid-sized meetings from the event planners. Now, here at Cvent, we're always looking for more organizations to leverage our sourcing channel. And in fact, we even have a team solely dedicated to sourcing efforts within existing organizations using our core event management technology, as well as a team solely dedicated to new organizations that we haven't historically worked with at all. In 2024, nearly half of the planner organizations sourcing CSN are new. And look, these aren't just your mom and pop shop sourcing a meeting space only RFP for a social event. You can see the average program sourced by these new organizations is just above 80 peak rooms. This means there's opportunity for many of the hotels joining us here today, not just those large meeting hotels. So as a planner new to the industry, you might be wondering, where do you even start? Well, you need everything at your fingertips, especially the digital tools. In an era where site visits might not be an option and you simply don't have time to spend hours researching a destination or venue individually. And that's exactly why we built the CSN, to make it as easy as possible to find a venue for your next event. Now, generally speaking, these new planners are sourcing within their regions. As an example, 50% of the planners in the Southeast are sourcing events to the Southeast. And with that being said, when they do source outside of their regions, the Southeast and the West continue to be those hotspots. In a couple of minutes, we'll share the top 20 markets who've received the most volume during Q2 across Cvent. Over the last few years, we'd often hear concerns about extremely short booking windows. And we see significant shifts in the amount of room nights being sourced in the year for the year versus more than a year out. Now, this continues to stabilize it. And that percentage that you see on the screen here reflects when the room nights are being sourced. For more context, in Q2 of 2024, 67% of the room nights sourced were in the year for the year, 26% were sourced 12 to 24 months out, and 6% have been sourced more than 2 years and beyond. Now, why is this important? Well, as a planner, this is good indication that there's lots of volume happening in the year for the year. And later on, we'll share a bit more on the full cycle of an event, from the event creation in Cvent all the way to the event start date. Now let's take a look at the seasonality for these events. Another new set of data that we're sharing today has to do with seasonality. On the left, you'll see the percentage increase of RFPs being sourced for the fall, spring, summer, and winter. For instance, year over year, we've seen a 17% increase for events taking place in the spring. And on the right, when we're looking at room nights, here we've seen a 32% increase in room nights for the fall. What I'm looking forward to most is how this is going to change over the coming months as we continue to analyze these trends. So when you factor in all of the above, planners often need to shop around for many reasons. It might be that venues are at capacity, it might be budget, but in some cases, it's not just the venue. They might even be considering multiple destinations. And as you can see here, 74% of the RFPs are sent to one metro area, 26% are sent to 2 or more metro areas, and 16% are sent to 3 or more metro areas. So nearly 25% of the time, planners are considering at least 2 destinations. And while we just talked about when these RFPs are being sent, what about where these RFPs are being sourced? What we're looking at here shows how these markets compared to Q2 of 2023. With the exception of Austin and San Antonio, all markets are up significantly. But this now gives you a glimpse into both the room rate growth as well as the rate growth for the top 25 markets as well as the others. For those top 25 markets, we've seen a 26% increase in room nights, but only a 0.1% increase in rate growth. For the rest of the markets, we've seen a 13% increase in room nights and a 0.7% increase in rate growth. Now, here's a similar breakdown for rate growth depending on the date pattern. For weekday events, we're seeing an increase from $249 to $295. For weekends, we're seeing an increase from $232 to $285. And for extended stay, we're seeing an increase of $192 to $276. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that all of these trends can help give you better context and information as you're sourcing those events. Now, when you look at this by chain scale, again, you're going to see that while the number of room nights in purple is up across each, that change in the rate growth in blue, it's rather minimal. And in some cases, it's even negative. This is all great news for the planner side. Now, one of the asks we've been getting to consolidate the data for corporate travel and group business. And here's kind of the first glimpse of that. What you're looking at here is the breakdown of group rates versus transient rates. And what's noticeable is that the group rates are increasing faster than the transient rates. For 2025, we're seeing the average rate for group to be $281 versus just $160 for transient business. Now, on this slide, what I love here, this is the first time we're sharing the verticals and the average meeting size. Life sciences has seen a 9% increase in the size of their meetings, up to $77,000. Tech has seen a 22% increase, up to $158,000. On the hospitality side, this can be great benchmarking data that can be further broken down for your individual property, for your portfolio of hotels, or even for a destination. Now, planners aren't just looking at the US for their events. International meetings are back. And so far this year, we've had more than 115 countries sourced by planners in the US, which is up 3% year over year. There's been over 900,000 room nights that have been sourced by US planners internationally. That's up 1% year over year. And lastly, over 1,300 US planners have sent an RFP internationally, up 13%. So when we're taking a look at the growth in room nights across the world, the Americas lead the way, up 21%. Europe has grown 2%. The Middle East and Africa has grown 14%. Australia has grown 5%. And Asia has decreased by 5%. Now, with respect to ADR, Europe is up over 3%. Asia is up 7%. The Americas and Australia is relatively flat. And Middle East and Africa is down by 2%. Easier said than done. It's a lot of effort for event planners to create that perfect event. And we're all witness to all the hard work put in by planners and suppliers throughout our platform. We all know about the challenges and difficulties that hoteliers have gone through since 2019 due to that fewer and newer staff. Now, planners are very conscious about collecting responses from a wide range of venues. On average, they include 11 venues across 8 brands for each RFP. In return, 5 venues will bid, 4 venues will turn down the RFP, and 2 just won't respond. And since planners aren't getting enough responses on the quality proposals that fit their needs, they're sending that same RFP to another batch of venues roughly 40% of the time. Sending RFPs, evaluating responses, selecting a venue, it's a lot of work, but that's what makes a successful event. But if you look at why suppliers are turning down this business, 59% of the RFPs are turned down due to unavailability of either guest rooms and meeting space or date patterns. And if you don't feel like you're getting enough bids back as a planner, take advantage of submitting the RFP with alternate dates. This past year, planners that were flexible accepted alternate date proposals 45% of the time. So for all the hoteliers here today, pay attention to those planners' alternate dates. You might still be able to win that business, or at least start building that relationship for the future by paying closer attention to the RFP details. This is one area where we're working really closely with suppliers. Small things like this create a much better ecosystem altogether. Now, another thing that we wanted to introduce today was some additional technology usage throughout our platform. On the event diagramming side, the number of events created is up 14% year over year. The number of diagrams is down 13%, but the number of exports is up 14%, which is great. This is obviously showing that there's tons of collaboration between the planner and the supplier side. For Passkey, the number of events is up 6.6% year over year, and the number of reservations is up 8.3%. And lastly, for CSN, we've seen 550,000 total searches with 202,000 unique searches. The last thing that I'm going to touch on today is the life cycle of an event. Now, depending on the size of the event, you're going to notice a difference in the duration of the event life cycle. We've plotted out 6 milestones: event creation date, RFP send date, response due date, the RFP awarded date, the event launch date when that marketing begins, and then lastly, the event start date. The average duration of an event created in Cvent to the event start date is 167 days. Now, the size of that event will absolutely impact this timeline. So for those smaller events with less than 50 attendees, from start to finish, it's about 4 months. Planners are usually sending those RFPs out approximately 105 days out from the event start date. Now, for the larger events with 500 plus attendees, on average, planners are starting that process nearly 10 months out. From the creation of an event in Cvent to the start date of the event, the life cycle will vary based on that overall size and complexity. All right, so now that we've covered our insights from the CSN as well as with CD and Passkey newly added, Kelly's going to take us through data from our event marketing and management platform.
Thanks so much, Alex. We're going to get into the event data to see how event organizers are strategizing and executing events this year. So first, let's look at how event formats are trending. So the bottom row here, that's showing us 2023 data, and on the top row, we're looking at 2024. In 2023, 89% of event programs leveraged in-person events, compared to 91% of event programs this year. 39% of programs contained hybrid or virtual event formats last year, compared to 34% this year. And finally, 8% leveraged all three formats, while 7% of event programs are leveraging all three event formats this year. So this trend, it's still shifting towards more programs containing in-person events, while slightly less are relying on hybrid and virtual. The numbers are not staggering, but we're seeing that trend. And this is one of the key trends that we actually anticipated at the start of the year. More emphasis on in-person events, with hybrid and virtual playing less of a role in the event strategy. So let's see how this trend has played out over the last 2 years. Here you can see the evolution of event formats starting in January 2022. So at the beginning of that year, in-person events were making up around half of the events managed on Cvent, while around 40% of the events were virtual. As we progressed into 2023, in-person events made up about 60% of all events, while virtual were about 25%. So then if we get all the way to June 2024, where in-person makes up 71% and virtual makes up 19% of all events. This means that April, May, and June 2024 represented the months with the highest percentage of in-person events, but the lowest percentage of virtual events in over 2 years. So let's take a look at how this trend breaks down by industry. And there are a few things that I want to call out specific to how industries are designing their event programs. We see here healthcare, education, and government are the most diversified with event formats. They're more likely to rely on all three formats. Healthcare and education adopt hybrid and virtual event formats more often. Manufacturing, healthcare, and third parties, also financial services, they are the top industries to rely on in-person event formats, although all pretty much are heavily relying on that format. Let's also look at the number of events and number of registrations and how they are trending over the past 12 months. So on the bottom row, you can see, on the top row, you can see number of events, and on the bottom row, you can see number of registrations. Each month is compared to the previous year's same month. So for example, on the top row, in June 2024, we saw 2% less events than in June 2023. And if you look on the bottom row, we saw 8% less registrations in June 2024 compared to June 2023. If we look at that general trend in 2023, we saw more events with around the same registrations. And 2024 has turned out to be kind of a mixed bag right now. April is overperforming all the other months. So it will be very interesting to see and keep track of this trend as we look into the second half of the year. This slide is breaking down the top row of data that we just looked at on the previous slide. So we're looking at the number of events per industry, April to June in 2023 versus April to June 2024. And across all segments, you can see on the left-hand side, we saw a 7% increase in number of events year over year. All industries are doing the same or more in-person events. Software and internet and manufacturing have the biggest dips with the number of virtual events they're hosting. manufacturing and third parties are doing significantly less hybrid events year over year. That dip in hybrid events holds true across all industries with the exception of computers and electronics, which has had increased the number of hybrid events they did year over year. Let's also look at the registration trends by industry. And this was that second row of data that we looked at 2 slides ago. So collectively, the average across all industries, the registration per event is down 1% year over year. So basically, we're looking at a flat number year over year with registrations. It's very interesting because we just saw we're doing more events, but these events are having less registrations. So I think this ties back to Alex's earlier point when he shared the simple meetings data through our platform, that simple meetings are trending, and we're seeing that across all industries. Financial services, software and internet, and computers and electronics, their events are thriving with significant increases in registration for in-person events. And we generally see more red across the board for hybrid and virtual formats, which makes sense based on the data we just looked at, showing that registration is lacking and there's less emphasis in these formats altogether. But financial services, business services, and third parties are in the green for virtual and hybrid registrations. Through our platform, event organizers can run events of all shapes and sizes. We have defined the events by tiers to see which event format and tier are most popular on Cvent. For example, Tier 1 here, they are high-profile events controlled by a central planning team. The focus is on ROI, and they're often complex and require advanced features and functionality. And also, there's a reliance on deep post-event reporting for these events. Specific to Tier 1, our data is showing us that these events have grown 31% in an in-person format year over year, while the virtual and hybrid formats are declining. Tier 2 events are mid-size events, but they're still complex. They leverage a lot of the features we have on our platform, and they benefit from streamlined workflows and cost savings. They also have a core team and a subcommittee support for these events. They're thriving as well in an in-person event format. We saw a very high 57% increase year over year. So Tier 3 and Tier 4, they're smaller events, which we consider simple meetings. They are cost effective. They have a small planning team that is focused on streamlined experience and basic reporting. They're very common with a low number of registrations, but really a high frequency in terms of how many of these events that a team is putting on across a year. So we're seeing Tier 3 events increase in popularity through virtual formats. These could be things like webinars or team building events. And we're also seeing Tier 4 events increase by 27% year over year in that in-person format. And these could be events like happy hours, dinners, or small team meetings. Let's look at the different types of events that have been hosted this year. So dinner or networking events are trending in popularity. They're up 10% year over year. These would be those Tier 4 events I was just talking about on the last slide. Both education events and seminars have increased in frequency as well. Webinars have the most significant decline, and we've seen this throughout our data as virtual event formats have continued to be less popular. Here, I'm sharing insights into when our customers are starting events based on event duration and format. We see that in-person events start earlier in the week as the duration of the event increases. For shorter in-person events, planners are choosing Wednesday to start. And for shorter virtual events, Thursday is the most popular start day. So here we're looking at the bleisure trend. It's still in full effect. In-person events tend to start after or they lead up to a weekend. Event attendees are staying before and after events, and we know that from any of the events that we've attended recently, and they want to experience the destination and enjoy leisure time. So it makes sense that as event organizers, they are designing their event programs with attendee preferences in mind. And it's always interesting to see when attendees are registering for events. Here we're looking at registration timing by event format. Nearly half of all in-person registrations happen within 4 weeks of the event start date. And while 75% of registrations, they happen within 4 weeks for virtual events. While the majority of registrations for in-person events happening more than 4 weeks out at 53%, you should adjust your sales and marketing campaigns as well as registration predictions to accommodate these behaviors. And I want to give an example because I know we do that for our marquee hybrid event. Hopefully some of you attended Cvent Connect. We benchmark our numbers year over year, and we know how many we can expect to see in terms of registrations within the last 4 weeks. And for example, this year, we saw around 20% of all registrations happen within 4 weeks. So I will say this data is probably not a one-size-fits-all approach, and you should probably adjust your strategy based on your year-over-year performance. And finally, we added a new section in our presentation. We're analyzing appointment performance during an event. So please let us know your feedback if you find this slide helpful. If you want to see more on appointments, we would really like to know what your feedback is. Here, we're looking at the appointments by event type and event duration. For virtual events, one-day events have the largest frequency of appointments, while 3-day virtual events, they have the longest average appointment duration. 3-day events also have the longest average time between when an event is launched and when appointments are created, which probably makes these events on that larger size and on the more complex side. If we think about the slide that Alex presented with our event life cycle, those are probably the 1,000+ registration events. Now, if we look at in-person events on the right, 3-day events have the largest number of appointments. They also have a high average appointment duration at 25 minutes, which is very similar to the 1- and 2-day in-person events. So there are 172 days between the event launch date and when appointments are created. 3-day events, that's clearly a sweet spot for in-person with appointments. So if you join us next quarter, I think we're going to get a little more into this trend, and we're going to look at actually when event appointments perform the best during an event. Okay, and with that, that concludes all of the data that we are going to share today. So as I said, please let us know your feedback. Take our event survey, which you'll see on the right-hand side as well. Let us know what you liked, what you would like to see next time. We're always open to adding more data to our presentation. I also want to talk about our Amazon gift card offer. You can go in the chat right now. You can see a link. You can sign up there to get a demo with Cvent and receive a $100 Amazon gift card. So please take advantage of that. And thank you all for joining. And we'll continue to answer Q&A in the Q&A box via written response. Thank you.